Welcome, innovators, business owners, entrepreneurs, technology experts, academia, government R&D communities, and other members of the North Carolina innovation ecosystem. This is Defense Technology Talks, hosted by the North Carolina Defense Technology Transition Office, or NC DefTech. In this podcast, we will showcase various technologies with local and national experts who aim to solve complex national security problems. In the coming weeks, we will highlight North Carolinians with the potential to, or those that have positively contributed to enhancing the capabilities of our warfighters, law enforcement, and first responders. We will also feature government leaders in research and development who have helped shape the future in this domain. These podcasts are just one of the many free services provided by the North Carolina government to assist the North Carolina innovation ecosystem to thrive and provide solutions for our nation. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Rob Robinson from the Defense Technology Transition Office, and today I have Kathie Sidner here from the University System here in North Carolina. And we're going to talk about 2022 and what she's looking forward to in 2023. And we started having a conversation before we kind of got the call started. But one of the things that we do these podcasts for is to keep our organizations and all of our people around us informed, because there's so much stuff going on in the innovation space, particularly here in North Carolina. And it's not just biotechnical stuff or not just biomedical stuff. And we overlook that because it's one of the biggest talent pools that we have in North Carolina. But don't want to steal any of Kathie's thunder, but kind of give us an outline of what you guys did this year in 2022, any big initiatives that landed, and just kind of give us a peek into what your 2023 looks like. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So I kind of was thinking ahead about just a couple of highlights that might be relevant for your audience. So one is a couple of years ago, the Army started a new program called Pathfinder, and there's a couple of sub-programs within that. One of them is Pathfinder Airborne, and it's a congressionally funded program, but the concept is really to sort of flip the model of how universities work with the Army on basic and applied research in particular. So in the past, as you know, Rob, the traditional model is the Army will give a grant to a university researcher for 1 to 3 years. They go off and do the research. They publish a research article. It goes on a shelf somewhere. Sometimes may or may not advance to something more, to the developmental stage, but a lot of times it doesn't. So the model here is connecting the researchers that are geographically, in close proximity to the actual active duty soldiers. In our case, with Fort Bragg being right here, connecting us with folks from 18th Airborne Corps and the 82nd Airborne Division, from the very beginning, from just concept phase of what are your pain points, how can we help, how can we find you the right experts, how can we put together a concept, a scope of work together, and then engage them in an iterative process throughout the whole innovation cycle. So this year in 2022, we finally got 3 projects off the ground at NC State University and one at East Carolina University. And those are with 18th and with 82nd Airborne Division. And so it's primarily around advanced manufacturing. So like 3D printing of some components for either to make them lightweight or more robust, more durable. There's different properties that we're looking at. That's a project at NC State. The other projects are more around data science, computer algorithms, apps, to make things more optimized for supply chain logistics, use of an aircraft manifest, use of weapons training ranges and ordering ammunition, that sort of thing. So really proud that we've got those 3 projects going and advancing to sort of the next phase. We have a couple other projects in the pipeline that we're excited about, one possibly University of Charlotte. And so far that's been about $1.5 million that has come in through there. So the dollar amount doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to give a sense of the scale of the work. A second highlight I think is really cool is there's some work that originally came out of NC State, but now it's with a small company called AMM, which is Advanced Materials Manufacturing.
Yep.
I know you guys at DefTech are very familiar because you played a really strong role in this, but they hold the patents to some work around making composite metal foam material that has lots of applications. The military applications include things like protection from blast, ballistics, radiation, vibration, all kinds of stuff. And then there's a bunch of commercial applications as well in transportation, construction industries, just tons, right? And so the big sort of win that was announced a few months ago was a $1.8 million award from DoD, and it was through the National Security Innovation Capital, which is underneath the Defense Innovation Unit, DIU. And I know that DefTech had a really critical role in making those connections between that small business and the funding agencies, and helped with sort of, building those bridges, helping with the proposal phases, and also connecting that company with the One North Carolina Small Business Matching Funds, which are run out of the Department of Commerce. So they got a matching award as well for some DOE work. So I think that's really exciting because it originally came out of NC State. This is advancing that work to the next level. So it has both dual use applications. So that's another highlight. And then something that's not quite a win yet, but I think is going to reach into 2023 and beyond, is that the UNC System, we are a member of the North Carolina Center for Optimizing Military Performance, NCCOMP. And so I know you're going to talk with Dennis McGurk soon, who's leading that effort from RTI. But some of the funding that's come in through there is to support the Department of Defense's Warfighter Brain Health Initiative, looking at traumatic brain injury. And so we had a meeting about 3 weeks ago. We had folks from 10 different University of North Carolina System campuses come. And it was just so exciting to see this intersection of folks that are looking at things from how to prevent brain injuries in warfighters to how to assess and diagnose them. So how do you look at biomarkers in the blood or serum? How do you look at eye tracking? How do you look at balance studies and tie all these pieces together? And then how do you monitor it through wearable devices or, neuroimaging or other ways? And then obviously treatment and rehabilitation, nutritional supplements, all these sorts of things. So we're trying to pull all those pieces together through NCCOMP and work with some of the private sector partners that they have, as well as folks from WOMAC, Army Medical Center, and then the Camp Lejeune medical folks as well, to bring a really holistic approach and working with soldiers and Marines and other service members to actually get them involved in the studies as well. So that's something that I'm excited about looking into 2023. And I'll pause there since we haven't quite gotten to the 2023 part yet.
Yeah, but I will tell you, just to hit all three of those things that you talk about. So the first one, the Pathfinder program, being able to bring, engineers closer to the warfighter. And we talk about this all the time in DefTech. That's one of our biggest talking points is, having your warfighter touch points, because again, it changes, it could completely change the direction of your design. And there's tons of people that don't understand that. And I think it's because they just haven't been in that situation, because sometimes, a young person may have a different perspective on it, or, hey, this would be much easier if I had an app on my phone, or maybe this would be easier if the graphic user interface looked like this, or it was tied to, a heads up display in the metaverse or something to that effect. And so being able to understand how important that interface is, particularly early in a project, because you can root out a lot of the design stuff. And so when you really get to the beta test phase, if you're using a computer analogy, by the time I get to the beta test, I've hammered out a heck of a lot more of the problems early that the end user is going to need, particularly if I'm focusing in on a DoD application.
Absolutely. And I think too, just to have the foresight of at what point and how is this going to be interoperable with the DoD systems in place. It's pointless to develop something if it can't actually interface with what you guys have already in place.
Yeah. And that's absolutely true. And again, that's the other part, is because you can bring some backside knowledge that people don't understand. Because one of the biggest things, like if you're building software or any type of computer type device that has to touch a government network, authority to operate is one of the first things that you really need. So if you are trying to get into that space, start approaching it from that angle initially and bake those into your cost, because most people will have this big, huge, robust capability, but they don't have authorization to use it on the government network. And if I have to air gap it, I don't even care. As a commander, it's the lowest priority, even though it may be the best technology out there. But if I can't put it on my network, I really don't want it. And so I think those are things that, are not considered sometimes, because people are so focused in on just solving the problem, which is great. But being able to solve the problem and actually get it to your customer is kind of like the next level piece of it. And that's why, the UNC system works so hard, and DefTech is constantly trying to communicate those warfighter touch points, so you can hammer that out early enough and make it part of your glide path for acceptance or transition of that technology. The second point, with advanced materials, those people, those folks are great. That whole team is awesome. The other part of it is like the connective tissue that we all have. So this is one of those things that is very, very close to being transitioned into the Department of Defense. They're looking at it very, very heavily just because it has so many different applications. It's more than just a dual use technology. It's a multi-use technology.
Absolutely.
So that allows you to put it in so many different areas that it's a huge win for all parties involved. And I know they're constantly working. And the biggest thing is, they get the matching funds. They had the opportunity to kind of pitch in front of the government, and government people perk up and like, this is in North Carolina. We're actually making this. And from that perspective, it puts a whole nother point on everything that we're doing in the state. And it also shows how well, it's kind of the three legs of the stool. You got the government, you got academia, and you got the, the government and the military kind of squished together, but then the commercial space. So you have those three legs. You got government, academia, and then commercially. And if you don't have those three things kind of in line, it's very, very hard for your technology to get adopted because of so many limitations on research and development dollars. So they want the R&D money to come from your commercial application. Really, they want you to take profits from, what you're making on the outside to bring it into the DoD, just because, for two reasons. One, they know that you have skin in the game, for lack of a better term. But the other part of it is they know that your technology is viable if you're already selling it. And so those are
the cost.
Right. Yeah. So it reduces the cost because then it just becomes an order of scale. It becomes a process of scale versus, hey, if I can do 1,000 in the commercial space, well, if I have to do another 1,000 for the government, that allows me to grow, but I already have a viable project or product. So I think that's one of the things that's very, very important. And then, of course, with the eye tracking and the TBI recovery and everything else, that's a very, very important issue. I mean, particularly here at Fort Bragg, because we're not just looking at, vehicle incidents or rollovers or guys bumping their head because of IEDs or whatever. There's probably, one in every 1,000 paratroopers gets a pretty rough landing and, goes feet, butt, head, knocks his nugget and doesn't say anything to anyone. But if we have passive sensors that allow us to track when this soldier gets injured, or, hey, look, all right, this person may be, acting fine right now, but they took a shot when they landed. They're not going to tell you that they're hurt. Medics, go check them out. And the other piece of it is by having all the, the sensors and modalities to narrow down the scope, you can put your effort where it needs to be. But the other part of it is it becomes less obtrusive, and we're preventing injuries at the point of injury rather than, years later when this person has, 13 concussions and we really don't know about it. And they go to the VA and say, well, I have 13 concussions. Well, it's not documented. You only have one.
Yeah. And what if you could have had an intervention that, if done at right after the point of injury, would have been effective, and now it's too late?
Yeah. And I think so, prevention is important, but then also coming up with modalities to kind of help people recover post injury as well. So I think that's huge. And I appreciate you kind of giving a great run, and that's awesome, because I know we're going to have Dennis on a little bit later. He's going to be talking of another topic, but I'm going to poke him about this one and ask him about the TBI recovery thing, because I think that's very, very important. It's just an important part of everything that we're doing, and the application transcends everything. Because again, if you don't know what sport causes the most traumatic brain injuries, believe it or not, it's women's soccer. Like, that's been documented for many, 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 many years. So if you have a daughter that's playing high school or collegiate level soccer, like, everything about TBI research is important to you as a parent.
Okay. Well, my daughter's 5, but I'm going to keep her away from soccer now.
Yeah. It's one of the most TBI producing sports, and it's because nobody really pays attention to it. You know what I mean? Like, we understand people are going to get TBIs in football, hockey, and lacrosse because there's a lot of bodies moving, a lot of collisions. But when it comes to women's soccer, not just women's soccer, they're not really bumping into each other that hard. Actually, they are. And there's headers, right? So every time I hit a soccer ball with my head, that literally is a minor concussion. It's just not as bad as, it's not as bad as like being in a car accident or falling out of an airplane. But I will pause there. What does 2023 look like for you in the North Carolina University system? What's a big goal or a big project that you guys are working on?
Yeah. So, well, a few things, but one is, as the university system, we actually just went through refreshing our strategic plan for the next 5 years. So we have one that will be good for 2022 through 2027. We have 12 goals that are part of that strategic plan. And I'm excited that 2 of them are military focused. So one of those 2 is getting more military connected or affiliated students enrolled in our system. We have about 21,000, a little over 21,000 students now that are veterans, active duty, National Guard reserves, spouses, and dependents. But our faculty recognize this tremendous value they bring to the classroom and how they perform really well, and leadership, discipline, all those things, right? So we're trying to make a push to get more military students into our institutions for lots of reasons. And another thing is we're trying to get more military partnerships in place with organizations like DefTech, Defense Alliance, AFWorks. There's so many organizations that we want to work with in a more strategic way. So that's exciting. As part of that, I know that, you and I talked a little bit at the beginning about the effort that's being led by the Department of Commerce within the state for something that, a name to be determined, but something like a defense innovation hub or defense innovation ecosystem of some kind. We fully want to support that. Obviously, the Board of Science, Technology, and Innovation came out with a report with some recommendations. We believe that this is really a great way to boost the economy of North Carolina. And really, and I'm not sure if you've already talked to John Harden about this, but just the need for a coordinated, strategic, long-term, sustained effort is the only way we're going to make a difference. And I keep thinking about it as something that's akin to the NC Biotech Center, which is huge now, but it started off very small scale decades ago, right? And so when we pivoted as a state from textile and tobacco to biotech, that was intentional. It took a lot of effort, it took a lot of sustained funding. And now our life science sector has over 800 companies with over 70,000 jobs. And the average salary is like $110,000, almost twice the average wages of a private sector job in the state. So I think we have the potential to do something like that in the defense sector if we have a sustained, coordinated, long-term effort akin to what they have with life sciences. So we're fully supporting that and going to get the UNC system engaged in that activity as it stands up. And I think that also aligns with the recently released National Defense Authorization Act, where there's some provisions in there about establishing different defense innovation ecosystems around the country. So North Carolina has a real chance to be one of those primary ecosystems. We already have the ecosystem. It's just promoting the awareness of it, getting the word out, having it designated officially for that reason. Another thing that we are looking at is we have within the UNC system 5 historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, and there's going to be a big push from DoD to support more activity in research and education at HBCUs and other minority serving institutions. But there's a lot of set aside dollars, but the Air Force in particular is they put out a call this year for a new UARC, which is a university affiliated research center and tactical autonomy. So North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro, they have submitted a proposal for that, and they are leading a consortium of 10 HBCUs. And we're really hoping, we think they have a really good chance of potentially getting this Air Force UARC. It would be a huge win for North Carolina, but also one of the underlying primary goals of the UARC is to get an HBCU that's currently classified as what's called R2 in the Carnegie Foundation classification. And that means there's high research activity to propel an HBCU from R2 to R1. And that's a really big deal because there's 101 HBCUs in the United States. Not a single one of them has an R1 status. And so if we can get North Carolina A&T to R1 status, that is a huge, huge deal. And also it would be a big deal for DoD and, just the STEM pipeline there. We have even more STEM talent with, more minorities, diverse talent, all that sort of stuff. So we're really hoping that will be across the finish line, and I think they're expecting to hear the decision sometime in early January. So we'll know soon about that. And the last thing I would mention is the UNC system is making a big push also for granting academic credit at our universities for military training and experience. We've been working on this for a long time, but we just passed a policy this past year that, we're going to make a more concerted effort to be more consistent about giving veterans and service members credit for what they've done in the military. And so we are trying to now build out a technical solution that will make it scalable. So it's not just one individual at a university evaluating a JST and then manually having to determine what kind of credits that person's going to get. We need to be able to scale this up and automate it because we really need the service members that are transitioning out of Fort Bragg and Camp Lejeune and the other installations to come get either a 4-year degree or a certification or whatever credential it is, right, to transition into our workforce and get these jobs like there's 17,000 open IT and cybersecurity jobs that a lot of military folks are highly qualified for. They just need some sort of certification. So we want to help them get there. And we've got programs like UNC Wilmington has a brand new bachelor's degree in cybersecurity. They started this year. Yeah. We want to get a lot more military folks in those programs and, can keep them here in our state and our workforce. And I think that will ultimately contribute to this defense innovation ecosystem that we're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm just going to pull one big thread out of everything that you said for everybody to kind of just to understand. It's workforce development, right? That's really what we're talking about here.
Absolutely.
And if you don't recognize what we're talking about, one, North Carolina now is a tax-free state for veterans. So if you're a veteran and you want to capitalize on your 9/11 GI Bill and maximize your paycheck, then you retire here in North Carolina and you go to school. I mean, there's tons of opportunities. Places like Fayetteville Tech give, free tuition for service members or retiring service members. Check it out, see what's available to you. And
Fayetteville State does too.
Yeah, and Fayetteville State. It doesn't matter who. It's just maximize your opportunity, right? So maximize your opportunity to do this because, gone are the days where you can say, hey, I'm academically retired. I've got a bachelor's. I'm done. Like a bachelor's degree, sadly, because of the ubiquitousness of, pay to graduate colleges online, a bachelor's degree is, sorry about that. A bachelor's degree is definitely less important in the broad scheme of education, just because there's so many of them out there that are available. And it's unfortunate that it's that way, but that's kind of the way that it is. But if you're truly trying to get into those technical aspects, those 2-year degrees or those certificate programs are just as important or more important than a 4-year degree. So when you hit that fork in the road, you got to decide, hey, am I going to be a technical expert or am I going to go to school and continue to pursue these opportunities in education that may land a much bigger financial windfall. But if I need money today, the 2-year program might be the way to go because there's internships. Like if you did power supply management and go to Duke, like I can guarantee you that you'll probably get a pretty good job working for Duke Energy rather than sitting in a 4-year degree program. But again, I can't speak to everyone's situation. I'm just saying in general. For the R2 status of an educational opportunity, like when you start thinking of research universities, everybody thinks of Georgia Tech, right? Georgia Tech is kind of like the big hot one on the East Coast. And so if we had that same level of research going on here in the state of North Carolina, that is massive. And I just can't really frame it as much as like I would like to, because that's massive. And then you tie it to an historically Black university, and then that's just creating more opportunities. And oh, by the way, you have to do it. Like I think there's a lot of people that don't understand that technology is the way things are moving, but we still need people that are capable of doing everything. So having a university that has a more diverse academic portfolio is great, because you may go in, you do a research project and realize, you know what, I don't want to do this, but I have enough knowledge and information that I can go on and I can manage these people rather than being the designer, or I can be, the project manager, vice being the person that, that's pushing the buttons. Either way, having that capability inside your university system allows people to determine that, because if it's not there, you're not going to know. And so I think that's really the biggest part of it, is just, creating those opportunities for people to really get their feet wet, understand like, hey, am I going to do, hardcore science? Am I a research scientist for the rest of my life and build disruptive technology? Or am I just going to manage these dudes? But I won't know if I don't have the opportunity to kind of get that piece of the education. And then the last part of it is the veteran transition into universities. That has always been a crazy bone to pick. I know tons of people that have separated, that have tried to go to college, and the frustration that they express is, yes, all I want to do is finish my associates, and I have to go back and I have to take these 47 classes that are just draining my limited resources that I have from my service, because I have to take all these compulsory classes that I could clep out of if there was just a way for them to absorb, my experience in the military as part of, my transition into the school. And I can tell you that that's a limitation for a lot of people when they decide to go where to school. Like, hey, look, if I have the choice between going to one of those online universities that may not be accredited, I may take that option over going to, FSU or
right,
NC State, because the difference is they will accept all my military credits and I come out with an associate's and literally only have to take 2 classes versus having to take 10,
That's right. And it's less time away from your family and work obligations, because you're a working adult with family almost all the time.
Yeah. And that's the other part of it is like the better we get at this, the more useful that person's going to be in the community, because not only can they get through the education process faster and get into that job that we need them in, it helps because, again, being a student while trying to be husband, wife, father, mother, running a soccer practice, taking your kids to all their different events and studying. And oh, by the way, you got 3,000 words to write this week. That's pretty difficult. And being an in-resident student, is not a luxury that everybody has, particularly as a working adult. So having the opportunity to kind of tip into that is great. And all of these things are super, super important, but really what it is you're harvesting talent in the state of North Carolina to support not only North Carolina initiatives, but bigger and better things across the DoD. I firmly believe, and I've said this, and you've probably heard me say that North Carolina is kind of like California. We're just kind of inverted a little bit. We've got beaches, we've got mountains, but we also have sweet tea and much nicer people, so
we sure do.
So from a perspective, like, we can do all the innovative stuff that they're doing in all the other innovation communities across the country. Why not do it here?
That's right.
And by the way, we're a heck of a lot closer to DC than everybody else. You've got Ohio, Texas, and California. That's thousands of miles away. I can drive to DC in a day and present whatever technology that I'm trying to present. So I think there's a lot of opportunities here in North Carolina. I really hope this Defense Innovation Hub explodes here in the next couple of years, because whatever we're going to call it, I don't even know the operation of the name, but we're going to make it happen, because it's an invaluable asset to have innovation in your state. And then when you have researchers that are constantly pursuing the next thing, and imagine just having a large community of innovators working together. And I think one of the biggest barriers that we all have to understand, whether it be in business, whether it be in academics, or even in your personal life, sometimes you've got to break down that, like, stop being so guarded and kind of open the aperture a little bit more so you can have that communication and development. Because sometimes picking up the phone and talking to somebody at another school that's not yours, unless you're like Duke and UNC and your football and basketball rivals, then you should be able to have those communications, because success across the state is success. But I will give you the last word if there's anything else that you want to plug, and then we'll wrap this up, because this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. I think you did a great job pulling all the thread together. No, I think that we just are looking forward to the next year and the years beyond that, for what role we can play in not only supporting national security and the missions of our military units that are based here. That's so important, but also the longevity and health of our economy of our state.
Yeah. And just so you guys know, like, North Carolina literally does a lot of heavy lifting in the Department of Defense, and we just don't really know it. I'm not going to talk about all the numbers because the 2022 numbers aren't out. But when you look at the amount of soldiers, we have the largest military footprint in the country between North Carolina and then tipping over a little bit into South Carolina with Lejeune and Charleston. So we have a lot of activity. That includes the Coast Guard, that includes everybody else that's kind of involved in this, and not to forget our law enforcement and first responders. So if you have an idea or a technology that needs to get in the hands of people, like, call DefTech. We will get it in the right hands of the university people to kind of hone it up to make sure that it hits target. And then we'll get it out on the street as quickly as possible, because, saving a soldier's life is more important than who gets the, byline in the article for the peer review document. And I will say it and leave it like that. But hey, either way, Merry Christmas to you, because I know that we're in the holiday season, and this is kind of our end of year review. But for the North Carolina Defense Technology Transition Office, I'm Rob Robinson, and along with Kathie Sidner, and we say thank you, and we'll talk to you guys next time. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Rob Robinson with the Defense Technology Transition Office. I have Dennis McGurk from the North Carolina Center for Optimized Performance, or NC Comp, for those of you that are familiar. He's going to give us a quick rundown of his 2022, some big events that they did, some big wins that they had, and then what they're looking forward to in 2023. But without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Dennis. Tell us about your 2022.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it. 2022 was a good year for NC Comp. So the North Carolina Center for Optimizing Military Performance kicked off in 2021, but in 2022, we had our first financial win. So we had a request for project proposals that came out of the United States Army Medical Material Development Agency up at Fort Detrick for a group to integrate warfighter brain health technologies. And so folks who may not be familiar, warfighter brain health consists of traumatic brain injury and psychological health. And this, when in the first year, will be focused on doing scouting for devices to assess traumatic brain injury. And then also developing concept of operation and concept of employment for devices to assess, to monitor, and to treat traumatic brain injury. Another big event that happened this year only happened because of DefTech. So coming up near the end of the year here, the calendar year, that is, we were reached out to by Denny Lewis and team from DefTech, yourself included, about a big event down in Austin, Texas, that was hosted by the Army Futures Command's Army Application Lab, the Vertex Human Performance event. And I'll tell you, it was awesome. And DefTech was able to pull a few of us together. Some of us presented down there from North Carolina, along with a lot of other folks. And some of us, like me, representing RTI International, where I work, and NC Comp, was able to moderate a panel. And so I'll tell you, the really interesting part about the Vertex HP event was it was about half government and then half academia and industry. So I'll tell you, it's really great that AFC was able to pull together the government folks who told you what their needs were with the academics and the industry folks who were able to say what kind of technology they have that might fit the needs. And then the government also came back with what were their current efforts. So you'd know, how does academia and industry fit in with government efforts, and where did the government want to go going forward? So that was a big event, and really do want to thank you, Denny, Bob, the whole DefTech team for, one, making us aware of it, then two, helping facilitate getting a chance to get reviewed and be able to go down there to Austin. And by the way, have great Tex-Mex and barbecue while there.
Nice. And of course, food is always a great part of any destination. But one of the other aspects of the discussion that we have to look at, two things. The first part of it is, as you mentioned, TBI recovery. And one of the things that we're talking about, mental health and TBI recovery, or psychological health and TBI recovery. It's a big thing. And a lot of people are kind of tipping into the hallucinogenics these days. I mean, there's a lot of people that are going down that road, but I know that's not a very practical thing for the Department of Defense. So I think what you guys are doing is more focused in on a holistic medicine approach that's actually viable within the construct of the U.S. government, because I think a lot of people are erring on the side of cannabis or some other type of, hallucinogenics use that is kind of that hippy dippy West Coast kind of Western Eastern medicine combined. That's it's kind of squishy. Whereas, like, if I have an actual technical device that I can do a readout or a report or do some actual testing on, and it's not going to be isolated to the individual success, I can probably broaden the aperture and get some better solutions that are more comprehensive for the force as a whole. And then the other piece of it is a Vertex event. There's a lot of stuff that goes on with Army Futures Command, and Army Futures Command is a great location for a lot of different things to come together. But you hit three legs of the stool that not a lot of people understand when it comes to government procurement of technology. So you have academia, the government itself, and then industry. And those three legs on the stool are very, very important in bringing solutions to the warfighter, because each one of them brings a different level of expertise and a different methodology to solving the problem. So I think you also hit on connecting on the problem, which is a big part of one of the things you hear Bob and myself say all the time, is connect on the problem, because so often we have a lot of technological solutions that are kind of out there floating that really don't have a problem that they fit in. So you have people that build something and they're like, well, I'll sell this to the government, but it doesn't really fit into any of the requirements. But what are your thoughts on kind of moving forward into 2023 with some of the technological advances? And I know you can't really kind of like identify companies that you're working with, but some of the protocols that they're developing, what protocols are you interested in using, particularly in the TBI recovery space? Yeah.
So, Rod, let me build off a little what you just said, because I think what we bring to the table with NC Comp is the four partners are NC Biotech, UNC System. I know Kathie Sidner also was part of your podcast. They're great partners for academia. And then the Fort Bragg Research Institute. And what Steve DeLellis and the Fort Bragg Research Institute, which is a part of Geneva Foundation, we bring to our NC Comp partners, 50 plus organizations, 100 plus investigators, what's the problem first? And not only what are the formal requirements, because they're generally kind of broad, right? You can get those through a broad agency announcement, be it SOCOM, be it Medical Research and Development Command, where I spent most of my Army career. But what Steve and the team from FBIRI bring is they're talking operational leaders, both the operational side and the medical leaders, predominantly at Fort Bragg, but from around the Army and the DOD. We're also down at MARSOC and getting ready to hopefully go down to the second MEF coming up in this new year. But we bring the problem to our investigators rather than the investigators bringing us a problem and a solution and see if we can find a problem. So mention who some of those teams are, and I'll tell you, with Warfighter Brain Health, we're really taking a multi-dimensional approach. So we have folks who are doing things for assessment like eye tracking, like EEG, like traditional neuroimaging, like traditional neuropsychological testing, other emerging technologies. Certainly wearables are a part of this. So you can assess both TBI and psychological health issues with more objective data. Because Rob, as you know from your career, if I ask Colonel Robinson, hey, are you all right? He's always going to say, yeah, because he's not leaving his team. So we need objective data to be able to say whether someone's had a TBI or whether they are suffering from any kind of psychological challenges. So I think we do that. And then we have multiple different treatments also coming together. Again, things like a QEEG guided transcranial magnetic stimulation. We have groups who are using AR, VR to be able to treat and prevent injury and things like that. We also have others, and we do have discussions with folks who are playing in psychedelics right now. And there is some work that's going on in the VA. There's certainly work going on in the civilian world. There are even retirees who are getting treated with psychedelics and then are coming back and reporting really strong results from it. And there's been at least one study, not yet published, hopefully it'll be out pretty soon, by a very prominent academic institution that showed great effects of a psychedelic on retired service members who went and got treatment. So that includes neuroimaging. It shows reductions in suicide. So there's at least a signal there. The thing will be in the future, can we do that with good science behind it? Can we effectively evaluate it? So I did want to address that. But in the meantime, to see if the DoD will someday be ready to do that in a very controlled environment, we're going after all the both current technologies and the emerging technologies, because I think when you put them together, we may be able to go, as DARPA likes to say, from an evolution to a revolution. And we have the teams here in North Carolina and our partners around the country in New York, in Texas, in California, in Iowa, to be able to put together some teams that can really move the ball down the field a lot further, a lot faster.
Yeah, and I think it's very important because one of the things that I've noticed, and it was brought up in a conversation, I forget who I was talking to or listening to, and they were talking about how, the generation after 9/11 has been exposed to a lot more trauma bonding, for lack of a better term. So they've been exposed to a lot more trauma. So they were born out of a tragedy. So you have people that are in their 20s now that were born around 9/11, service members that have served, whereas like a lot of us kind of built our repertoire of coping mechanisms before we actually deployed for the first time. Whereas these guys were thrown right into the fight. They didn't have the opportunity to kind of develop that thing. They're watching their friends get hurt, and then they have to come back and readjust. And, regardless of what the Army says, there's a great bunch of folks out there that are doing the analysis and thinking about it. But 2 weeks of a cool down period or reintegration is not enough time to really identify if there's something significantly wrong with someone psychologically. And by expanding the aperture now and trying to capture, that data, we can at least save this generation from having the problems that we're currently having, with suicide awareness and behavioral health stuff. Because I think one of the things that I've seen recently is there's a large number of people, between like 30 and 45 that are committing suicide. Before it was like the numbers were pretty broad and random, but now it's really starting to neck down. And when you start looking at those people between like the 30s and the 40s now, those were like the kids that were teenagers that saw 9/11, but really didn't experience, something before it. And like they're living in their lives now. Then you throw a pandemic in there, then it just adds additional, stress and pressure to those people. And then now they're trying to, figure out what which end is up. And I think, the military is a great place because, again, it goes back to stress inoculation. And I saw something the other day that makes me scratch my head, and, not to dive too deep on, the military training aspect of it, but I will say this, somebody getting in your face and, making it a vigorous on the spot correction as a young soldier is stress inoculation. And I think there's something to be said about, exposing people to stress early so they can process it later. That's part of the reason why we want all of our soldiers to be as educated as possible, because educated people have been inoculated to stress. Like, no, writing a paper with 30 minutes left before the end time is not the same as being shot at, but every little bit counts, so if I can build that into the system where people are stressed enough where they're like, oh man, I don't know if I'm overwhelmed or if I can't take this. And then when you put them in a life or death situation, they can cope with it a little bit better because they've been inoculated to stress. But, that's my soapbox for a little bit. But I think, brain health and mental health activity is very, very big part of that. And I think the stress inoculation piece is part of that comprehensive look in behavioral health or warfighter mental well-being.
Yeah, Rod, there's a lot of really good points there. I think what you sort of described, the fancy term we used when I was an Army medical research guy, was what you're describing as precision medicine. Yeah. Right. So it's for different people. There's different stress levels. Right. And I know from the research we did years ago in Iraq and Afghanistan, there's a certain level of combat experiences where it really, really starts to hit people. Yeah. And so how they are prepared helps with that thing. But it's really about, can we make sure what's going to work for Rob Robinson is different than what's going to work for Dennis McGurk, than what's going to work for Denny Lewis, right? So you got to figure out, how do we assess in very precise ways, and then how do you do your treatments? How do you target your treatments? I'll tell you, the area where we have problems with mental health is people quit. And so if we could figure out how to keep them in therapy, because it never works if you go one session and quit, right? So can we look at new ways that we'll be able to keep them in and then target it to them? And if one treatment doesn't work, get them on to the next one quickly, right? If one therapist isn't the right one for them, find them a different therapist. So I think these are all things we're looking at. Certainly with TBI, we're looking at different ways to assess it. We're looking at that warfighter brain health is for the point of injury, but there's still lots of good work being done on people for how do we take care of long-term care, be it in garrison, or if it's, related, certainly the VA is also looking at that. But back to the suicide, it's a tough nut. The DoD has invested hundreds of millions, right? It's multifactorial, it's multi-stress, why people are doing it. And it's, again, I think you need skills for the person. You need buddies who look out for that person. You need leaders who are also looking out for the person. You need the person themselves to be willing to talk about what's going on. And then if they need the therapy or the help, somebody who's trained and qualified to get them with evidence-based treatments that can help. So it took a lot to get to people to that point. It's going to take a lot to keep them from going down the road and dying by suicide.
Yeah. And I think you made a great point about, it takes a tribe, and I think part of it is when you build that tribe collectively. We have those a lot of the time in the military. When you're deployed, you're in that collective bubble where, the person to the left or right of you is depending on you to make it there the next day. And if you're not there, then there's a gap that is significantly missed by the organization. So I think it's kind of keeping that mentality, particularly as you come back. And normally what happens, and again, I go back to the reintegration piece because that's my experience. You come home, you got 2 weeks off, you take some block leave, and guess what? That's probably the worst thing that you can do is send somebody off, that's been at Fort Bragg after a 15-month deployment or 12-month deployment somewhere, and then they go to like Seattle and hang out by themselves and go back to like the old ways of them doing things. I mean, you would think that we would all know this at some point, but I think it's just counterintuitive. Plus, with so many soldiers, it's hard to kind of regulate, hey, are you plugging in with your community when you show up on the back end? Because usually most people are just happy to be away. And I can understand that as well. I think, it's a comprehensive problem. And we as an organization, both those that are still in uniform or people on the fringes that are supporting those that still wear it, it's just something that we all have to be mindful of. But moving on to the Vertex thing. So Vertex was one of those things that kind of came across. We're talking about human performance, and human performance is a broad gambit. Like you said, like there's so much stuff involved in HP
that I can't just narrow it down to say, hey, I'm going to make this person run faster or shoot better or, have better memory or whatever. They're so comprehensive that there's a lot of applications that kind of go into it. And some of it can be, as simple as, hey, I got this person to shoot faster, or it could be as complex as like, hey, I've got this person that can memorize this sequence of numbers that's in the 17, 18, 19, 20 digits, and that's human performance. Because when you think about it, why are phone numbers only 10 digits? Because that's about the max that you can commit to memory very, very easily. So how do we get people to start thinking in more advanced ways, or, utilizing, target recognition or discrimination or whatever you want to use the application for? But human performance is very, very important. Tell us about the Vertex. You already mentioned the barbecue and the great food, but what was a great speaker or just interaction that you had while you were down there that was really worthwhile for you, that like the audience, if they were following you around, which conversation would you absolutely want them to hear?
Yeah, so we got an hour. Yeah, so the very quick answer is they brought in some really strong people. So first of all, they had the deputy commanding general present, and he really gave a nice focus for sort of what are they looking at in that 2040 timeline, because as most of your listeners probably know, right, AFC is not supposed to be about today's problems. They're modernizing the Army to fight the fight in 2040. So there was a good focus there. There were also fantastic speakers who talked about data. So data is obviously huge, both how do you produce it, and this is an area I think NC Comp will be moving out in 2023, is how do you get the right platform? And this is an area of the challenge that I had discussions with my old government friends. We got multiple platforms. We got one in SOCOM. We got one at CCDC Soldier Center. We got another one at H2F, the Holistic Health and Fitness. And why do we have multiple platforms, right? We got those players in NCCOM because I think that they are willing to work together, right? Folks are trying to deliver solutions to take care of service members. And then we got, how are you collecting the data? So if I say, I want to look at body composition, and I say, all right, I got a deck, so I'm going to do it. I'm going to do a tape test. We can't combine that data. And then the third thing in that data triad, methodology, it's the platform, both front and back end, methodology, and then what are the data elements, right? How do you measure something? If I'm going to say PTSD, do I do a PTSD checklist? Do I do a clinician administered patient checklist survey? There's all these different things. We're trying to pull that all together. There were also some really good discussions about wearables, and they had use cases and what are people doing with different technologies to, again, assess health. They also had a really strong panel on how do you take education capabilities and use that, because everything we do, right? Training is a big component of that is learning, right? How do you teach service members to learn better? You mentioned memorizing stuff. It's that whole, how do you keep people thinking well or make them think better when they're tired, they're hungry, 3 of their buddies might have died yesterday, they're far away, there's problems back home, the AI is feeding them a bunch of new information now, and they still got to make those decisions. So that was a really interesting panel. And they are putting out, they did a YouTube channel, so you can see some of these, or a lot of the Vertex events, not all, some of them wouldn't share, but go on there and check them out and you can see the panels. My panel was about how do you take data and how do you take human performance lessons learned from places like University of Wisconsin. One of them was the head guy who runs the Badger fitness program. Then I had a guy who was doing a wearables for psych health that was really novel. He literally was showing his own stress as he was speaking. And then the third guy was talking about how do you use blockchain and how's the new internet going to work, Internet 3.0, and how do you get use data to sort of identify the right people. And that could be used for recruiting. That could be used to help teaming. So I think that there was just a lot of really good talks. And again, it was not just a bunch of industry people talking to industry people, the government, the industry, the academia, all talking together. And I left there with a bunch of business cards of people who said, I like what you're doing with NC Comp, Dennis. How do I get involved? So we're North Carolina centric, but we are going country, nationwide to try to deliver better solutions.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we always have to consider. We want to start in North Carolina because we live here, but the other part of it is like there are some very, very capable partners in other innovation communities, so we can't cut it off and say, oh, I don't want to talk to them because they're from Ohio. Well, maybe they have something that you don't, and that's really very, very important. I think one of the things that you also mentioned, and this is the education piece that comes with the data aspect of it. So like, not only do I have this big, huge repository of data, I have like 40, 20-foot containers of servers that are processing this data. But the other part of it is how do I get people to trust it? And that's one of the biggest issues. And, like from the special operations perspective, those guys don't want anybody touching their data, don't want anybody looking at their data, because, hey, that's personally identifiable. Number one, eventually it could be, or the other piece of it is I don't want a widget on my wrist or some heart rate monitor on my phone determining whether or not I'm ready for mission. And it goes back to our previous discussion when you were like, hey, if I ask the operator themselves, it's like, hey, are you ready to go? Rarely, if ever, in type A organizations are you going to get a paratrooper, a special forces guy, or any type of, Ranger regiment cat that say, yeah, I'm not ready to go on mission today. And so what that does is that's an additional layer of stress. But like, if we were all willing to accept the fact that like the data is pure, it's not spiked, and we're only going to take action if it's, risk to mission or risk to force, then it makes it more acceptable, I think, for people to accept the fact that data is being used. But I think because it's still in the kind of infancy of it, like we can do it all day long for performance athletes in like the Olympic Training Center or on a college football team, because there's no life or death hanging in the balance. But, if my number one long range shooter in an organization is hard down and I've got a mission that I need him on, do I assume risk, even though the data is telling me he's not mission ready and he might miss? Or do I, run the risk and say like, hey man, are you good? And he says yes. And I take him on the mission and it fails. I think that's a huge part of growing into a data driven organization. And, commercially they do it pretty easy. Like, hey, if the numbers don't make sense, hey, we're not making that call. But when your primary weapon system is people, then it kind of changes the calculus.
Yeah, Rob, you make some great points there. And I'll tell you, it also leads to who gets the information. So I'll tell you, I believe that, and we had data that used to show this, one of the big stigmas of why people didn't go get psych health help is they wanted to solve the problem on their own. And I would never, right? Just as you said, you're not going to discourage people from wanting to solve it. You're not going to discourage people from wanting to go out on mission. That drive is what makes service members awesome, right? But what we can do with that is then give them the tools. And in this case, the tool is the data. Let them know what's their status so they can, and what could they do to fix it? Could we do something? If you're sleep deprived, is there a way to clear the glymphatic system? Maybe we're looking at, there's some NCCOM members doing that at UNC Chapel Hill. Can you measure that? Can you clear it? So maybe you don't need to sleep, but you need to know that in advance, and you need to know, did it work or not? Because now I can still perform. And there are times, as you said, if it's going to put the mission at risk, it's all just information to give to the individual and leaders to make more informed decisions with better data than, hey, Rob, how you doing, man? I'm good. Sergeant, I'm good. Got it, right? This would just give the person, the leaders, more data, and you can roll it up and you can learn from it, and we can test things. And you and I talked about this last Friday. You can use all this technology to practice for when you don't have the technology. So you can get a feel for what's it like when I'm really flowing, right? What's it like when I'm really not, when I'm really struggled and I got it from here. And then later on, when I don't have this, I got that feeling, oh, that was what it was like when I was crashing. I better do something before I do crash. So I think that's an area you and I talked about, right? Technology for when there is no technology, and building that adaptability, because we already have awesome people.
Yeah.
And we could just make them more adaptable.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest points of everything that we should be looking forward to. And this is like 2023 and beyond, is how do we get that data assurance? How do we get our customers, our partners, both in the academic environment and in the corporations, to kind of come together and say, hey, look, this is the data solution that we're using, and get everybody training and moving in the right direction. Because again, yes, there's some people that will have data for data's sake, and they are the types of folks that will sign you up for $100 million contract over the next 10 years, and maybe you'll get 30% of what you're asking for. But when you build it from the problem set into the solution, which is what NC Comp is trying to do, what DefTech is trying to help identify, and everybody in the innovation ecosystem, if we can catch it early, and this is one of those things, and as much as we all like the programs of record in the military, we also understand that those are big monolithic beasts that don't have a lot of latitude. And so if we can find it early enough in the stage and it gets developed and then adopted, and it's a 95 to 100% solution that's gone through the academic traps, the government traps, as well as the commercial traps, by the time it gets to the end, if we're giving a 95% solution to a soldier, he's going to want to use it. But if I'm giving him a 50% or a 60% solution, it's probably going to end up in the bottom of a Connex, or the first time that it fails, they're going to look at the rest of their unit like, man, this thing sucks. I'm not going to use it again. And so there's a balance there that, how do we make this revolutionary technology? And I think really that's what it is like programs of record are evolution, and the revolutionary technology is going to come from somewhere else that is going to basically break the wheel. And we're going to have to take a hard look at how do we integrate this technology into the current force, because we can't survive without it.
Yeah, great points. Great points. I think, some of this we could do iteratively. Some of it is a breakthrough. But I think, starting with the problem, getting lots of test points, doing some early test and evaluation, late validating what we think a technology could do with an actual, either simulated or real scenario as much as you can, I think moves that needle faster. And we're trying to do that. And DefTech's pulling folks together that are all, again, of that like mindset of what do I do to deliver solutions to improve the health and performance of service members, is the role NC Comp tries to play as a partner to DefTech.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. This has been a great conversation, because we can dive a lot deeper into a lot of different topics.
Love to sometime. Ron, let me know when.
Yeah, for sure. But the reason why we want to do this is because, again, this is a passive opportunity for people to learn more about what you do and more about some of the events that you attended. We'll put the Vertex stuff in the podcast description so everybody can kind of find it and see what's going on. But the reality of it is it's an incredible opportunity to have this much talent in the state. We have probably just as much talent in North Carolina as every other major innovation community in the country. The difference is we've got to advertise it more. And by going to events like the Vertex, it kind of shows, hey, look, we're here in North Carolina, we're doing stuff. And oh, by the way, the biomed and the biotechnical stuff, that's our sweet spot. So as a state, if you are out there looking for a partner to do something in the biomedical or bioengineering facilitation area, come to North Carolina. There's a lot of other states that can do it, but we can do it better.
Yeah, Rod, let me finish if you don't mind. You just nailed it, right? So great academia, great biotech, Fort Bragg, Camp Lejeune, right? We got the ground pounders. Norfolk is not that far up for Navy in the future. We got Seymour Johnson, some Air Force. We have some AVSOC here. So we really are unique. And you put that all together and you can really make things happen.
Yeah. Well, Dennis, I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.
This is Dr. Dennis McGurk from the North Carolina Center for Optimized Military Performance. I'll say it right this time. But and I'm Rob Robinson from the North Carolina Defense Technology Transition Officer, DefTech. Hey, look out for this one. We're going to put out a couple more. This is your end of year report. So if you're not listening to these, you're going to miss out. They'll still be available in 2023, but you'll have a leg up if you listen to them before the holidays. So we thank you guys for checking us out, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Defense Technology Talks, hosted by the North Carolina Defense Technology Transition Office, or DefTech. The full version of this presentation has been uploaded to our Mobilize platform. Mobilize is another free service that we provide to access more national security business and collaboration opportunities. You can also sign up for more information at deftech.nc.gov. Join us again soon for our next podcast coming to a platform near you.